Let the torch of freedom burn.
President Thomas Jefferson said, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society, but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power."
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's WallBuilders Live, and we're talking about today's hottest topics on policy, faith, and the culture, always from a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. That conversation is with David Barton, America's premier historian and our founder at WallBuilders. Tim Barton, national speaker and pastor and president of WallBuilders. And my name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach. You can check us out at WallBuildersLive.com and also WallBuilders.com. That's our two websites. Great information at both websites. The WallBuilders Live website has archives of the program, list of stations around the country where you can hear us. It also has the video series on quarantines and the Constitution. Breaks down that issue for you constitutionally, historically. And then we are always looking at these subjects like that from a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective so that we can analyze, especially today on Foundations of Freedom Thursday, those foundational principles that produce a good society and allow for freedom. Now, typically we get a ton of questions and we take your questions and that drives the conversation, but today we're going to do it just a little bit different. Jeremy Newman's going to be with us a little later in the program, talking about a case out of Texas on parental rights. And, of course, that's something we talk about a lot on the program because it is a fundamental freedom. So Foundations of Freedom Thursday is a great time to talk about this. And there are definitely people in the country that don't think parental rights are a constitutional right or a God-given right. They really think that the state should decide the relationship between the parent and the child, and the state should decide how the child should be raised.
Yeah, this is a big problem because when you go back to the very beginning, before there was ever civil government, there was family government. And the first really kind of government you have is the government of the family that God established back in the book of Genesis. And so before there was a community, before there was a society, there was family government and a family structure. And that has been the basis of everything that's happened since then. From the family, you get the church. From the church, you got the community. From the community, you get the society. From the society, you have civil government. But it all comes from the family. It all starts with the family. And so it's not surprising that if you want to change the culture, you go after the building block of culture, and that is the family. So we're seeing some straight-out attacks on family right now, particularly on the rights of parents. Do they have the right to educate their kids? Do they have the right to raise their kids? Do they have the right to even have their kids in their own house with them, as this case is going to deal with today? It's amazing that this fundamental right's under attack.
Well, and this is one of the things, too, you see a lot in the progressive movement. You see a lot in kind of Marxist, communist, even socialist regimes, is that it disintegrates the family from being a family unit and being individuals of the state. And when you remove family rights, and we see this in Europe, where in Europe, I mean, it's almost as if the governments in many of these nations see children as wards of the state, and therefore it is their responsibility to make sure that the kids get this, X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. And the parents are almost hindrances to the goal of the state, instead of recognizing much more from the biblical model that absolutely God made the mom and dad to be the ones in charge of raising that child. That is not the government's job or responsibility. The government's job is very limited when it comes to children because they're not the ones that God tasked with raising children. This is where, though, once you lose a lot of the mooring, certainly we would talk about the biblical worldview. If you don't know the Bible, you don't know how to apply the Bible, you don't know what it says, you don't know how to live your life based on those standards, it's going to make society look different. And this is even one of the reasons the founding fathers argued in favor of the morals of the Bible, because they knew for a society to work as a free society, there had to be a structure of morals, and there's no greater morals than those taught in the Bible, so they promoted the Bible. But the fundamental basis of the Bible is really about the family structure. We know, just looking practically at nations, when there is a strong family structure, the community is stronger, the state is stronger, the nation is stronger. When there are more broken families, you have a harder time when it comes to economics, with economic policies, with social programs. You have a harder time with education, with educational accomplishments, you go down the list.
Almost like there isn't an area that it doesn't touch in a negative way when the family breaks down.
And you're exactly right. And this is why when you even see the counter of cultures of do we want more government, less government, part of the conversation really revolves around who is the one in charge of the kids, in charge of the family. And this is where you see a big struggle between the government determining and dictating and mom and dad being able to determine and dictate what they believe is best for that child. And this is where you see the battle today.
One of the things we've seen that's been really counterproductive to an individual kind of society or a free market type of society toward a government society is the education system. Education has really primed people for socialism, that we need to get away from free market, we need to get away from individualism, we need more government. And so the reaction to parental rights, and part of the way you can measure parental rights is even by the reaction to homeschooling, because that's ultimate parental rights. I want to raise my kids, I want to educate my kids. We're seeing from Harvard that they're actually a professor there has called for a ban on homeschooling. Parents should never be allowed to raise their kids. And so we're going to have a conference here at Harvard to get all the experts from around the world and across the nation together to talk about how to ban homeschooling. We don't want parents raising their kids. And as the article goes, as this professor expressed it, it's real clear that when you have independent thinking kids, that's a real problem for the state. And we don't want that.
Yeah.
And specifically, the professor said we don't want parents educating their kids.
That's right.
Right, because they would argue, no, you can raise your kids. They just shouldn't be with you all the time. They need some outside voices to tell them things that you won't tell them. So it portrays parents in this situation, especially parents that want to homeschool their kids. It's because they want to be abusive and et cetera, et cetera. The article is ridiculous. It's gotten a lot of backlash. It's really dumb on a lot of levels, but it does reveal the attacks we're seeing against the nucleus of the family and against the role of mom and dad being able to educate and raise their kids, be engaged in their life.
And we've seen the same thing now that we've had the COVID-19, where there's been an increase, a forced increase in parents teaching their kids at home because they can't go to school. And now we're finding that parents are saying, hey, this is not what I thought it was. I think I can do this. And I've even heard parents telling me that kids have said, we're getting all of our lessons done by noon and the rest of the day is ours. We can get all of our schoolwork done. This is different. We want to homeschool. And so now we're seeing where that even public schools, as parents are putting in for homeschooling, the public schools are refusing to process the request for parents to homeschool their kids or to be moved to a homeschool co-op or whatever. So there still is a lot of educational resistance to this. And there's a case that's come up in Texas that deals with fundamental parental rights. And it's a huge issue because the way this case goes can either strengthen or undermine the rights of parents in all sorts of areas, not just that of education, but other areas as well.
Yeah, it even comes down to the basic idea of who has those parental rights and when can your parental rights be taken away. It's a case in Texas at the Texas Supreme Court, and Jeremy Newman is going to be with us when we come back from the break to brief us on that case. Stay with us. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
Abraham Lincoln said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
Hey friends, it's Rick Green from WallBuilders Live, and I have had so many requests about what in the world can we be studying at home right now. I got the kids at home, they're normally in school, or if you homeschool, you're looking for additional material. One Room Schoolhouse. It is a great new series WallBuilders is putting out where you literally get a tour of the WallBuilders library as Tim Barton and Jonathan Ritchie bring history to life. There's a couple of resources on this. You can go to YouTube and search for WallBuilders and look for One Room Schoolhouse. You can go to our Facebook page and get it right there on Facebook as we do it live each Monday and sometimes additional days from there. And then you can also just go to wallbuilders.com. Scroll down to the bottom and we'll be posting the videos as they come out. This is such a great way to learn and a great way for you to share with others. Gather the family around, watch the One Room Schoolhouse, and learn some great history. It'll be vitally important to restoring our nation and bringing back these principles that made America great in the first place. Check it out, One Room Schoolhouse at wallbuilders.com.
Thomas Jefferson said, "The Constitution of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and duty to be at all times armed, that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us today. Jeremy Newman with us from Texas Homeschool Coalition. They do great work on so many different fronts, but right now, a very important parental rights battle in the state of Texas at the Texas Supreme Court. Jeremy, I know you just got out of the hearing. Thanks for taking some time with us today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on.
So tell us what happened, that led to the case, and then we'll talk about what happened today at the Texas Supreme Court. You guys have a website for this as well, and we can send people to that immediately. Would you give that out for us? Yeah.
So the website is called letherstay.com. And kind of the lead-in to the whole story is that back in 2016, the mother and father of this 5-year-old little girl, Anne, they had a custody agreement that they came to because they had separated, they were living apart, and they agreed to roughly 50-50 custody of their daughter, Anne. And then a couple of years later, the mother got involved in another relationship. She ended up moving in with her boyfriend. And because she was living with her boyfriend, that also meant that the daughter ended up spending about half of her time living with the boyfriend as well. A few months after that happened, the mother died in a car accident. And so
let me ask you this real quick. So
Sure.
During this time period, the dad was not absent. He had joint custody, was seeing his daughter, doing his fatherly job for half of the time, and still taking care of her.
Yeah. And even during the times when the daughter lived with her mother, she only lived with this boyfriend, and he only cared for her to the same degree you would expect any adult to. I mean, the only reason she was there was because her mother was there. It had nothing to do with the boyfriend, in other words.
Yeah.
And so then a little bit before the mother died, she got engaged to her boyfriend. And so after she died, the boyfriend comes to court and files for custody of the daughter. And he had only lived with her cumulatively for between 5 and 6 months up to this point.
And she's how old?
She's 5.
Okay. So she's got 5 years with dad, 5 months with this guy.
Yeah, and I mean at the time she's 5 now. She was I think 3 or 4 at the time. But yeah,
and even during that 5 months, half of that time is with the dad, and then half the time is really with the mom, but the live-in boyfriend is around.
Yeah, well, so no, actually the 5 or 6 months are cumulative, so they were spread out over an 11-month period. And
okay.
she spent about half of it with the father and about half of it with mother and the boyfriend.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So the weird thing that happened here is that right after the mother died, her parents, so the maternal grandparents, filed for custody of the daughter. And, the daughter had always had a good relationship with them. The mother and father had both always fostered that relationship. And so they hadn't been cut out, and they still weren't being cut out after she died, but they filed for custody, and the court denied them custody. And here's the kicker, is that the court denied them custody because it said, you're not able to prove that the father is an unfit parent. And the law requires you to prove that before you can get custody of his daughter, which is true. And that's written into Texas law. It's also constitutionally required. But then the really strange part was...
And that's kind of like, just so people understand when those cases happen, I mean, it's kind of like the presumption of innocence. In this case, you're presumed to be a good parent. That's old case law. That's the way we typically go into these battles. You have to prove that the guy's an unfit parent. He doesn't have to prove that he's a fit parent. They got to prove he's an unfit parent. So we assume that he's a fit parent and should keep custody of his daughter.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly how it works. And so, and this is, like you said, really old constitutional case law. This goes back about 100 years. In fact, the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, describes it literally as the oldest fundamental right they've ever recognized. And so the weird part happened, though, when this boyfriend turned fiance filed for custody, the court granted him custody, even though it had denied custody to the in-laws who had known the daughter and helped raise her. And they denied to the in-laws on the grounds that you can't prove the father's unfit, but then they granted it to this fiance who's had a few months with the girl. And the argument that the fiance made was, hey, the law that the grandparents are filing under requires them to overcome this presumption. The different law I'm filing under does not require me to overcome the presumption, so I get to come to the court on the same footing as the father, right? And the father's attorney said, well, no, because the Constitution requires you to overcome this, whether Texas law does or not. So that's the dispute we're now having at the Texas Supreme Court, is whether or not you have a constitutional right to raise your own children.
And this, you guys have talked about this as possibly the most important parental rights case in Texas history. And the reason is that the ramifications are huge. If they win, if the live-in boyfriend wins, then that means that anyone can claim to have custody rights of your child and be on equal footing with you.
Right. Yeah. So that's exactly why it's such a big deal. Is that
you meaning the parent? I mean, like you don't have that presumption of being a good parent anymore if this thing goes through.
Right. And obviously, like, nobody can predict how the court is going to write the opinion. And so they might try and skirt around the issue or something like that. But the fundamental question they're being asked is, do parents have this right to raise their children? And the fiance is arguing, well, no, at least not in this case. I get to come on equal footing. And if you listen to oral arguments today, there was kind of some legal gymnastics that was taking place inside the hearing, and this comes through in some of the briefs as well. That it's such a novel, strange argument to make that a person with no relation to this child comes on equal footing with the biological parent. That the fiance's attorneys got really creative trying to come up with a reason why he should be able to argue this. And the argument they made was, they said, hey, back in 2016, the mother and father entered into a custody agreement between the two of them. And the act of them entering into that custody agreement back in 2016 and having the court stamp its approval on that was that they ceded all of their parental rights to that court forever, and any future party who ever comes to modify that order no longer has to overcome their parental rights. So they're
saying they gave their parental rights to the court to call the shots from then on? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they literally are arguing that the action of the two parents getting an agreed custody order from the court had the effect of them giving up their constitutional rights to their daughter, and any future party who were to come in and try and modify that order, in this case the fiance who never had any relation to her at all, no longer has to overcome the constitutional presumption because the parents gave up their constitutional rights.
So for all of our parents out there listening that up to this point we're thinking, okay, this case has nothing to do with me, blah, blah, blah. Listen, what that means is if you've ever had a divorce or had any kind of a separation where you didn't even have a knockdown drag out in court, you went in with an agreed order that your attorneys had worked out, that basically these folks are saying that means you've handed over your parental rights to the court. And from now on, the Constitution doesn't protect your basic parental rights. Am I understanding that right, Jeremy?
That's pretty much right. So what it would mean is, you guys got a divorce, and then, your neighbor across the street who watches your child often enough that they think they have a strong relationship with your child gets to come to court and say, hey, because you guys had a prior custody order, and I'm intervening now to modify that custody order, I no longer have to overcome your constitutional rights. And they're a completely new party. They had nothing to do with the prior order whatsoever.
So what is the, and I'm guessing the other side is basically saying, well, look, if they'd gotten married before the accident, he would have all these rights. I don't practice family law, so I don't know where that kicks in. Would he have had to officially have adopted the girl? I mean, does any of that even matter? But I'm sure they're making those arguments, though.
Yeah, so if you read their briefs, in fact, they refer to the fiancé as the stepfather, even though he has no legal or biological relation to the child at all. And one of the justices actually asked in the court today, okay, you say he's the stepfather. Are you using that colloquially, or is he actually the stepfather? And the attorney said basically, well, he feels like a stepfather. So he doesn't have any actual legal relationship to the child, but they're calling him the stepfather. And yes, they're basically trying to shoo their way in to say he feels like a parent, and so he should be able to get custody like a parent.
And just to be clear, there's been no, at least I haven't seen any, there's been no evidence presented that this father, the real father, is a bad parent. I mean, when I watched the video about him, he seems like a good parent. I mean, obviously you don't know just from that, but I mean, from what y'all have seen and dug into this, it'd be different if we were trying to get, some horrible dad that's beating the kid and, never shows up and leaves them out in the park by themselves for hours and 4-year, all this. Is any of that happening?
No. So they actually, it's not just that nobody has accused the father of doing anything wrong. The lower courts have actually affirmatively found that he is a fit parent, and on that basis, they denied the in-laws the ability to get custody of the daughter.
There you go.
I just think it's kind of a crazy argument. In fact, I had a friend I was talking to today about it who she said it's the most ludicrous argument she's heard, because like you don't need your constitutional rights until you show up in court, right? Like that's the reason you need them, is so that you can, prevail in court once they're challenged. And now the fiance is arguing, well, sorry, if you've gone to court before to defend your constitutional rights, or even, here's the crazy thing, you don't have to have gone to court to defend them. You might be sued by someone else, show up in court, end up with a custody order, and then Bob, 5 years down the road, says, hey, I'm going to come in and assert that I have a close enough relationship with your child that I get to modify your prior custody order. And now, according to the fiance, he has just as much right to your child as you do.
Wow. So this is very important to fight this battle and prevent this. This could really, infringe upon and weaken the basic, as you said earlier, basic fundamental parental right that the court has said, the high court, the Supreme Court has said. I mean, this is a basic constitutional right to be able to raise your children the way you see fit, and to be assumed to be a good parent and have to have some evidence against you otherwise, none of which is in this case. So, very important case to watch. Jeremy, timeline, what do we think would be the expected decision date?
Yeah, so my best guess at this point is we're probably looking at late summer. I mean, they could move faster, it could take longer, but that's our best guess at this point, probably late summer when something will come out. And so in the meantime, the really big thing that we're trying to push for is, first of all, to create publicity on the case, make sure that people know about it, and make sure, frankly, that the court realizes that the public is watching what they do in this case. And and we're also working to try and recruit other pro-family organizations who might come in and file briefs to defend the father, just to strengthen his legal position.
And there is a petition at letherstay.com. Folks can add their name to that. In fact, I've been watching it through our interview, and I mean, it's like every 2 seconds another person signing. So this is really, really good. People are waking up and realizing how important this is, and getting the word out is important too. So they can share on social media from that website as well, letherstay.com. Every parent in the country should be concerned about this. Fundamentally protecting your basic right as a parent here is essential. Jeremy, thanks for all you guys do, man. Appreciate the hard work, and looking forward to hopefully getting some good news from you later in the summer when this decision comes out. Yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about it. That was Jeremy Newman from Texas Homeschool Coalition, again, following that case, and we'll get him back once the decision is handed down, or at least get an update for you on the program. David, Tim, I mean, obviously this has major repercussions because it makes it, if this father loses this case, then really anybody in a kid's life suddenly has equal footing before the court to be able to challenge your parental rights and try to get either joint custody or maybe even take custody away from you. It is crazy to think about as a parent that you are the biological individual who helped bring that offspring into existence, and somebody who has only been a part of the family and arguably part of the family, right? I mean, that's on a relative level. Live-in boyfriend who becomes fiance, and it's such a weird scenario. And even the way that Jeremy was explaining, the way the lawyers had to do gymnastics to kind of explain, well, no, he already gave up his rights when they filed for joint custody, et cetera. It doesn't make any sense at all, but it very much fits in the line with some of what we're talking about, where you are seeing a culture inside of the nation that is very much degrading toward the role of the father, toward the role of the family structure, the family unit. Even the idea that we wouldn't maybe give custody to the mom's parents, the grandparents of Anne, but we will to this live-in boyfriend who just became the fiance. It doesn't make any sense at all, and certainly it does seem like an attack on the rights of parents. And Jeremy mentioned that there just hasn't been a whole lot in law on this before. I mean, you kind of assumed that the biological father had rights, but there hadn't been a whole lot in law. Well, it's the same way the Constitution really doesn't talk about the sun coming up in the east and going down in the west, because that's such an obvious fact. We didn't need to comment on it. And that's where the culture has been for so many centuries in America. It was an obvious fact. If you read the Bible, you knew that. If you'd seen the way culture operated, you knew that. So we didn't have to comment on it. And now we're at a point in the culture where you really do have to kind of comment on this. Otherwise, there's nothing there. Well, and this is where, as Dad, you're alluding to, when you don't have an objective standard to define even what a family unit is, when you live in a culture of relativism, of moral relativism, of this kind of subjective reality, when everybody determines truth for themselves and makes up their own rights and wrongs, it makes sense that this would be a confusing issue and confusing time for people. But when we had a culture back up in earlier America where the Bible was still a very centerpiece of American life and culture, we had a standard to go by
But once you remove the standard, all of a sudden it becomes a little harder to know what's right and wrong once everybody starts determining for themselves.
And this is going to be a precedent-setting case. So, Rick, as you were mentioning, people are kind of signing that petition, looked like every couple of seconds. That's something folks can do across the nation. You may not be in Texas, but Texas courts have an impact on other courts. They cite each other. And so you can go and sign that petition and let your voice be heard, and that will help the court to know that people are watching, that we want the right decision on this. That's something everyone can do.
That's a great point, David. And even, when you talk about such a fundamental right, even the slightest infringement on that right, we need to come out, in force. Everybody needs to let their voice be heard on that to push back against, and let the courts know that you'll push back if they take this away. So very important for everyone to sign that, and we'll have links today at wallbuilderslive.com to make it easy. We are out of time for today. We sure appreciate you listening to WallBuilders Live today. We encourage you to take action. Be one of those folks that's part of the solution. In other words, you recognize not only the rights you have under the Constitution, but the responsibility that you have corresponding with each of those rights. And part of that responsibility is getting educated about these freedoms and then teaching as many other people as you possibly can. So do that at our website today, wallbuilderslive.com. Again, those videos on constitutional issues. You can also take our full Constitution class and share it with your friends and family. You can teach it to other people through our Constitution Coach program, and that is free right now. While you're stuck at home, get that free Constitution host license and begin to teach that to your friends and family. There at wallbuilders.com, there is a wealth of resources right there available for you, videos and books and different series that are going to get you into these foundations that we cover on Foundations of Freedom Thursday. So check all of that out at wallbuilders.com. Thank you so much for listening to WallBuilders Live.
President Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
We stand under